Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on quite a journey into ancient wisdom.
That's right. We're looking at the core philosophical ideas from the Upanishads.
Specifically the main ones, the Mukhya 13, right?
Exactly. And we've also got some comparative material on a few key Upanishads, the Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, and Katha.
And a closer look at one in particular.
Yes, the Prashna Upanishad. We'll get into its teachings and, some of the commentaries around it.
Okay. And this is really for you, the learner, someone who wants to get the essential knowledge, find those aha moments maybe, without getting totally bogged down.
Precisely. We're trying to pull out the most compelling ideas, what these texts say about reality, the self, living a meaningful life, all big stuff.
So our mission today is basically to unpack these core teachings, these frameworks, and highlight what still feels relevant, maybe even, thought-provoking today.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What exactly are the Upanishads? Why should we care about these ancient texts?
Right. So think of them as ancient Indian wisdom texts. Sanskrit texts. They date back quite a ways, maybe 800 to 500 BCE, roughly.
Wow.
And they really form the philosophical foundation of Hinduism. They're seen as its spiritual core, sometimes called Vedanta, which literally means the end of the Vedas.
End of the Vedas.
Meaning they represent a sort of culmination or a shift. You see, earlier Vedic traditions were often heavily focused on rituals, ceremonies.
Okay.
The Upanishads mark a turn inward. Much more emphasis on philosophical questions, on meditation, as the way to understand, well, everything. The universe, our place in it.
A shift from outer actions to inner understanding.
Exactly. And while there are many Upanishads, these Mukhya 13 are really revered for their deep spiritual wisdom. Though, sometimes the classical count is 10 or maybe 12. It varies a bit.
It's like a real turning point in thinking.
Absolutely. From doing to knowing, in a way. And one of the biggest ideas you find across them is this concept of unity. Yeah, the unity of the self, our individual self and the world, or the ultimate reality. The Isha Upanishad really kicks things off here. It says everything is enveloped by the Supreme Being.
Everything.
Everything. The key idea is to see your own self, the Atman, in every creature. To recognize that fundamentally the individual soul, Atman, and the ultimate reality, Brahman, are one.
That sounds profound.
It is. And the implication is that this understanding encourages action in the world. And this is crucial, without attachment to the results.
Action without attachment. We hear that a lot.
Exactly. It's about the intention, the process itself, not just clinging to the outcome. It's a theme that, like you said, really resonates still.
Definitely. What other big ideas did they explore?
Well, they really dug into the nature of knowledge itself. What is supreme knowledge? The Kena Upanishad tackles this. It asks, what's the power behind everything, behind thought, sight, action?
And the answer is?
Brahman, the ultimate source. But what's interesting is the idea that you can't fully grasp Brahman just through your senses. True enlightenment, it suggests, requires something more, maybe like divine grace. Our everyday knowledge has limits when it comes to the ultimate.
So there's knowing, and then there's knowing, a deeper level.
Precisely.
Right.
Then you get the Katha Upanishad. This one's famous for the story of Nachiketa, a young boy, talking with Yama, the god of death.
Right, I've heard of that one.
It's a fantastic dialogue. It explores the Atman, the self, as immortal, something beyond birth and death.
Tackling the big questions head on.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes choosing spiritual truth over, fleeting worldly pleasures as the way to realize this immortality.
How does it make that clear?
It uses some really powerful metaphors. The most famous is probably the chariot analogy.
Yes, the chariot.
The body is the chariot, the intellect is the driver, the senses are the horses, the mind, the reins, and the soul, the Atman, is the rider, the owner of the chariot.
That really paints a picture.
It does. It's all about the need for self-discipline, using the intellect to guide the senses and mind towards the ultimate goal, towards liberation. It makes the abstract feel quite practical.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift to the Prashna Upanishad. You mentioned it's all about questions.
Exactly. Prashna literally means question. And this Upanishad is structured around 6 big questions asked by students to a sage named Pippalada.
6 questions. What kind of questions?
They cover a lot of ground, from the origin of the entire universe down to, the nature of the divine within us. Macrocosm to microcosm. It's sometimes called the secret doctrine of the 6 questions.
Secret doctrine. Intriguing. So what's the first question?
The first one, asked by Kabandikatyana, is pretty fundamental. Where do all living beings come from?
Okay, starting big.
Yeah. Sage Pipalada answers that Prajapati, the creator figure, desired offspring and performed tapas, intense spiritual effort, or heat, you could say.
Tapas.
And through this tapas, he created a pair. Rai, which is matter or energy, often seen as the feminine principle, and prana, which is spirit or life force, the masculine principle.
Spirit and matter, prana and ray.
Exactly. And their interaction, their intermingling, is what creates all the diversity we see. The Upanishad even links the sun with prana spirit and the moon with ray matter. It also mentions paths souls take after death, a northern path for self-seekers and a southern one for those seeking offspring. The core insight is this foundational duality driving creation.
Fascinating. A cosmic duality. What was the second question?
The second one from Pargava Vaidarbi asks, what powers actually uphold a living being? Which ones illuminate it? And which is supreme among them?
So what keeps us going?
Right. Pipalada explains that various powers like space, air, fire, water, earth, speech, mind, eye, ear, think of them as deities or functions, all claimed they were the essential support. But then prana, the vital life force or spirit, demonstrates its supremacy. When prana prepares to leave the body, all the other powers realize they can't function without it. They only exist because of prana.
So prana is the key, the fundamental energy.
Yes, exactly. It's seen as the supreme principle that animates everything else. It's recognized as this vital force beyond just the physical parts. Some commentaries, like Madhva's, even see prana as a kind of mediator guiding souls.
More than just breath, then. It's the life principle itself.
Precisely. That leads nicely into the third question from Kasaya Asvalayana. He asks, where does this prana come from? How does it enter the body? How does it distribute itself and stay? How does it leave?
Getting into the mechanics of life.
Yeah, really trying to understand it. The answer is that prana arises from the Atman, the self. It enters the body through the mind's activity.
Through the mind. Interesting.
Yes. And then it delegates functions, setting up subordinate pranas, you could say, to govern different parts of the body, elimination, circulation, digestion, the senses. And the main prana resides in the eye and ear, moving through mouth and nose.
Wow, quite detailed.
It even offers a theory on departure that the upward moving prana, udana, leads the soul out at death, guiding it based on its thoughts at the end, either to virtuous worlds, sinful ones, or back to the human world.
It's like early physiology and metaphysics combined.
You're just
So
dead.
consciousness, sleep, dreams.
That's exactly the fourth question from Saryani Gardia. He asks, what sleeps in a person? What stays awake? Which god sees dreams? Who experiences happiness in deep sleep? On what are all these founded?
So the nature of our inner states.
Right. The Upanishad explains that during sleep, the senses withdraw into the mind like rays of light into the sun, so the person doesn't hear, see, etc. But prana, the life force described here as the fires of prana, stays awake.
Prana never sleeps.
Correct. Dreams are explained as the mind experiencing its own greatness, reconfiguring what it has seen and heard, experiencing things both real and unreal.
The mind replaying and creating.
Yes. And then deep, dreamless sleep occurs when the mind is overpowered by light. In this state, the mind sees no dreams, and there's a feeling of happiness, of bliss, because everything has temporarily withdrawn into the Atman Brahman, the ultimate ground of being.
The return to the source, almost.
Exactly. The ultimate foundation for everything is the Atman, identified here with Purusha, the cosmic self. It's a very early and insightful look at consciousness.
It really is. Did they explore practices like meditation? You mentioned Om earlier.
They did. The fifth question from Saibya Satyakama is directly about that. If someone meditates on the syllable Om until the moment of death, what world do they attain?
So the power of Om meditation.
Yes. And the answer outlines different outcomes based on how completely one meditates on Om, which has three elements, A, U, N.
Oh, U-M.
Meditating just on the A part leads to a quick rebirth on Earth, endowed with qualities like austerity, self-discipline, faith. Meditating on A and U leads to the intermediate lunar world, a kind of heaven, after which one returns to rebirth as a human.
And the full AUM.
And meditating on the entire AUM syllable, seeing it as representing the supreme person, Purusha, leads to liberation. One is freed from sin, reaches the highest solar world, and beholds the Purusha dwelling in the heart. They attain complete self-knowledge and realize the self as universal, eternal.
So Om isn't just a sound, it's a pathway.
A powerful tool, yes.
Yeah.
A symbol and a means to different levels of realization, ultimately leading to liberation.
Incredible. What was the sixth and final question?
The last question from Sukasan Hardvaja brings it back to the individual. Where is the person with 16 parts?
16 parts. What does that mean?
It refers back to an older Vedic concept, Prajapati, the lord of creation, who is sometimes described as having 16 aspects or parts. The question is essentially asking about the ultimate reality or self within the individual.
Ah, okay. The microcosm mirroring the macrocosm again.
Exactly. Pippalada answers that this person, the self from whom all creation originates, including prana and the 16 parts like faith, ether, air, light, water, earth, senses, mind, food, etc., is right here, inside the body.
It's within us.
Yes, all the parts, like rivers flowing to the ocean, ultimately merge back into this person, the self, losing their individual names and forms. This self is immortal. And knowing this self, the Upanishad concludes, is the highest knowledge, the key to overcoming death.
Knowing the self is the ultimate goal. It's a recurring theme.
Absolutely central.
Now, you mentioned comparing the Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, and Katha Upanishads. What stands out when you put them side by side?
Well, first off, they all share that ultimate goal, guiding us towards self-realization, towards moksha, liberation. That's the common thread.
Okay, but different styles.
Definitely different styles and approaches. The Brihadaranyaka, for instance, is often quite dialectical. It uses philosophical debates like the famous exchanges involving the sage Yajnavalkya.
Lots of back and forth
General?
reasoning.
Yes, very analytical, often quite abstract. It famously uses the neti-neti approach, not this, not that, to describe Brahman.
Trying to define it by what it's not.
Kind of, yeah. Emphasizing that Brahman transcends all our usual categories. It's more of an intellectual, rigorous inquiry.
Makes sense. What about the Chandogya?
The Chandogya often feels more poetic, maybe allegorical. It really emphasizes the interconnectedness of everything.
Ah, like the salt and water idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a classic Chandogya metaphor illustrating Brahman's pervasiveness. And of course, it contains that incredibly famous statement, Tat Tivam Asi.
Thou art that.
Right. The direct assertion of the identity between the individual soul, Atman, and the universal spirit, Brahman. It also puts a lot of emphasis on dhyana meditation as the way to really realize that connection. It's perhaps more focused on intuitive experience.
More feeling, less pure logic, maybe.
Perhaps, yeah. And then there's the Katha Upanishad, the one with Nachiketa and Yama. This one feels quite practical, very focused on ethics.
The chariot analogy again.
Exactly. It uses these vivid metaphors and narratives to convey really profound truths about death, the eternal soul, Atman, and the choices we make. It stresses that liberation comes through self-knowledge and ethical living, not just through rituals.
So Brihadaranyaka is analytical, Chandogya is poetic and experiential, Katha is practical and ethical. Bit simplistic maybe, but...
It captures some of the different flavors, yeah. But despite the varied approaches, the core message is consistent. The non-dual nature of reality, the identity of Atman and Brahman. Self-knowledge is the key to dissolving the illusion of separation.
It's fascinating how they all arrive at that same fundamental point through different paths. Speaks to the depth of the idea, I suppose.
I think so. And the influence of these texts has been just immense. They really laid the foundation for much of later Indian philosophy.
Like Advaita Vedanta.
Exactly. Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualist school, which was famously systematized by Adi Shankaracharya way later, around the 8th century CE, he built heavily on the Upanishads.
And Shankaracharya commented on the Prashna Upanishad too, you mentioned.
He did, yes. His commentaries helped solidify their importance and interpretation for centuries.
So these aren't just dusty old texts. They've been living, breathing parts of philosophical and spiritual traditions.
Absolutely. They constantly emphasize transcending Maya, this idea of illusion, or maybe the deceptive appearance of the everyday world, to realize the true reality, Brahman.
Getting beyond the surface level.
Right. They offer these pathways to self-realization, to liberation, and they remain absolutely central to Indian philosophy today. Even the structure we saw in the Prashna Upanishad.
In Q&A format.
Yes, and the fact that Pippalada made the students live with him for a year, practicing austerity, tapas, self-discipline, brahmacharya, and faith, Shraddha, before he'd even answer their questions.
Right. Ethics before education.
Exactly. It shows this ancient emphasis on moral purity and commitment as prerequisites for deep learning. That interactive style, the humility of the sage saying, if we know, it tells us a lot about their educational ideals too.
A really holistic approach to seeking wisdom. Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways you'd want people listening to hold on to?
Well, I think a few key things stand out. First, that fundamental message of unity, the deep connection between our individual self, the Atman, and the ultimate reality, Brahman. Seeing the self in all.
Unity. Got it.
Second, the concept of prana, Not just breath, but this vital, underlying life force that animates everything. The Prashna Upanishad really brings that out.
Prana is the core energy.
Yes. And third, the journey itself, the path towards self-knowledge, often through practices like meditation, ethical living, and inquiry, as the way to liberation, to understanding our true nature.
The path to moksha.
Exactly. And the Prashna Upanishad, with its specific questions, gives us this amazing window into how they thought about cosmology, consciousness, life, death, the big picture.
Lot to chew on there. And for you listening, here's maybe some food for thought. These texts constantly circle back to interconnectedness, the unity of yourself with the world, with others. So consider this. How might really internalizing that sense of unity, really feeling that interconnectedness, actually change how you view your day-to-day life, your interactions, the choices you make?
That's a great question to ponder, because this deep dive, really, it's just scratching the surface, the symbolism, the philosophy. It's incredibly rich.
So much more to explore.
Definitely. If any specific idea we touched on today, maybe prana or the chariot or om or tatvamasi, sparked your interest, I'd really encourage you to explore that specific Upanishad or teaching further. There's a whole universe of wisdom there.